Without further ado, I'm going to invite our keynote speaker to the stage, and we'll get started. Stylianos Tzimis is Senior Analyst and Hybrid CoE of the Maritime Hybrid Threat section of, I guess it's NATO, right? We're dealing with what's going on in the waters, very importantly from a NATO perspective. From a military perspective, he's a military commander from Greece, and he's going to address us on the subject, as I say, which is just international keynote remark. We're going to see what we're going to hear. The floor is yours.
So, thank you, Terry, for your kind words, and thank you all for being here this morning. So, good morning to all of you, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to convey the sincere gratitude of the Director of the Center of Excellence, Dr. Teija Tilikainen, to the organizer for inviting the Center to this impactful conference. On a personal note, I would like to thank all the previous presenters and speakers for their valuable insights. This morning, I have been tasked with delivering a keynote focused on how we can protect critical undersea infrastructure and how we can counter the threats posed by underwater munition dump sites. Let me begin my presentation with some facts. Today, subsea power and data cables and gas and hydrogen pipelines form the backbone of European resilience, connectivity, and security. The bad news is that these cables and pipelines are precisely mapped, easily accessible, and poorly defended, making them ideal targets for gray zone warfare. The alarming news is that millions of tons of unexploded ordnance still blockade the seabed of the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. These munitions are far from dormant. They are latent weapons. For decades, what was once out of sight and out of mind has now emerged as a persistent threat. The good news is that the undersea infrastructure crosses national borders and jurisdictions, making their protection a shared responsibility. However, without harmonized legal frameworks, joint operational standards, and real-time intelligence sharing, we risk fragmentation and vulnerability. So, no good news at all. Nowadays, the seabed supports 95% of global connectivity. A vast network of 600 telecom systems across 21 critical maritime choke points connecting the planet. However, a single well-placed attack at one of these points could sever multiple cables. The seafloor is also covered by 1,000 kilometers of electricity cables and gas pipeline, linking offshore and onshore energy-critical infrastructures. When critical pipelines and cables breaks down, the fallout isn't just technical. It may be existential. A single severed cable can disrupt financial markets. A coordinated strike could black out entire regions. Rerouting options and spare capacity are not always feasible. And when multiple lines are cut in quick succession, the result isn't disruption, it's chaos. Repairs are slow, costly, and heavily dependent on sea conditions. Timelines can range from a week to several months. The daily cost of disruption simply shocks. The numbers become even more alarming when we consider that subsea telecom cables suffer approximately 200 outages each year, nearly one every other day. What is truly staggering is that 10 trillion euros in financial transactions flow through these cables every single day. What is truly alarming is that 98% of the world's telecom cables is owned by just 4 companies. Despite this critical dependency, the global capacity to respond to disruption is limited. One of the 80 cable-laying ships worldwide, from 80 cable-laying ships worldwide, only 22 are capable for repairs, and China owns half of them. In contrast, Western companies operate a smaller repair fleet, mostly clustered in the North Atlantic, making the high-capacity telecom cables of the Indo-Pacific highly vulnerable to strategic influence from China. Through the Digital Silk Road initiative, China is already controls 60% of the global market in the cable market. Western policymakers are sounding the alarm. That's true. In a world that runs on digital connectivity, over-reliance on a single geopolitical actor is a critical risk. The threats are real. Deliberate sabotage, prolonged repair delays, data interception, and software-based exploitation. In Europe, these threats are not theoretical. They are fully present. European waters host the highest number of subsea connections in the world. Today, around 150 high-speed telecom cables, 15 high-capacity power interconnectors, and over 20 major subsea pipelines render these waters of vital importance. With average depth of just 52 meters in the Baltic Sea and 95 meters in the North Sea, these cables and pipelines are especially fragile. A single large vessel dragging its 80-ton anchor can easily slice through a cable or pipeline. But that is only half the story. In January, a suspected unexploded ordnance was discovered near the Flags gas pipeline in the North Sea. Just months earlier, in 2024, another UXO was cleared from the North Sea wind farm East Anglia 3. These incidents are not isolated. They are reminders that close to these critical cables and pipelines lies a latent and often overlooked arsenal. In the wrong hands, this munition could be detonated to target critical infrastructure during a hybrid operation. Nowhere is this risk more acute than in the Baltic and North Seas. These waters are not only choke points for trade, energy, and data, but also a playground for shadow fleet smuggling, Russian oil export. These ships sail among 4,000 large vessels on a daily basis, making their identification a difficult task. With dense undersea infrastructure, heavy maritime traffic, and decomposing wartime munitions, all packed into confined waters, the margin for error or sabotage is razor thin. Since September 2022, just 7 months after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 13 cable and pipeline ruptures or explosions have been reported in the Baltic Sea. These incidents were not accidents. They were engineered to appear as accidents. The modus operandi. A commercial vessel dragging anchors across submarine cables and pipelines with a surgical precision, not in territorial waters, but in illegally complex exclusive economic zones. In these zones, sovereign control is limited, enforcement is weak, and attribution is murky. When sabotage strikes here, states are left navigating a maze of legal jurisdictions. The current international legal framework struggles to define actions that fall short of armed conflict, but still cause significant economic and security harm. And that is the point. The hybrid playbook is clear. Cause damage, spark confusion, and exploit legal and operational blind spots. These sabotages are not conventional attacks. They are operations carefully calibrated to remain below the threshold of open warfare. The perpetrators are often suspected, but proving intent is nearly impossible. Russia and China are no longer just suspects. Mounting evidence suggests that both powers are not only benefiting from hybrid acts of sabotage, but are actively shaping a new era of hybrid warfare. In essence, both states are engaging in deniable attacks on undersea cables and pipelines, blurring attribution, accountability, and the Western ability to respond. While Russia has long been the usual suspect, China is emerging as a far more insidious maritime hybrid threat. China's advanced undersea capabilities, including deep-sea mining, are raising significant concerns. China has repeatedly been accused of deliberately damaging undersea cables near Taiwan, but its activities in other regions are also drawing international concern. Notably, 2 Chinese vessels, the New Polar Bear and the Yipeng 3, have been linked to incidents in the Baltic Sea. Despite the findings, European states have largely continued to attribute such acts to Russian aggression. The true nature of these incidents remains uncertain. If these actions were indeed deliberate, they would suggest that the strategic alignment between Russia and China knows no limits. On the other hand, with limited reliance on undersea infrastructure, Moscow views cables and pipelines in the North and Baltic Seas as legitimate targets. Top Russian officials, including Nikolai Patrushev, have openly threatened retaliatory strikes on undersea infrastructure in response to what they describe as Western meddling. The involvement of Russian spy vessels such as the Yandar and the deep-sea submarine Losarik is in espionage and seabed mapping activities is no coincidence. The numbers tell the story. According to Leiden University, only for the past year, Russian hybrid attacks of sabotage in Europe surged to 26. By targeting critical infrastructure, Russia not only diverts attention from Ukraine, but also tests the state's red lines cast doubt on NATO's ability to defend its members and expose its vulnerabilities. In accordance with this strategy, Russia didn't flinch when the West struck back with sanctions in 2022. For the Kremlin, sanctions, especially those choking its seaborne oil export, are not just punitive. They are existential. In response, Moscow assembled a so-called shadow fleet, acquiring over 600 near-scrap-age tankers. It is striking that more than 230 tankers in this fleet belonged to 17 European shipping companies. This fleet in being operates in grey and dark modes, evading Western oversight by flag hopping and selling oil above price cap, funneling 900 billion euros back to Russia's war machine. Recently, an even darker threat has emerged: the stateless fleet. These vessels sail without or under a false flag. No flags means no accountability, no oversight, no consequences. They are ghost ships in every sense. Under international law, they shouldn't even be at sea, and yet they are not being stopped. Russia is willing to protect even the ships. Recently, a Russian fighter jet violated the Estonian airspace over the Baltic Sea after Estonia attempted to intercept one suspected stateless tanker. But these ships do not just smuggle oil. They are increasingly suspected of engaging in sabotage. The incidents on the slide demonstrate that we have a phenomenon underway. Experts warn that shadow ships are just one mechanical failure away from the disaster. Fires, collisions, and oil spills are becoming increasingly frequent. One wrong move could trigger an environmental disaster on the scale of the Exxon Valdez or Deepwater Horizon. Analysts estimate that the direct cost of a major oil spill could reach up to 2.7 billion euros. But the long-term consequences would be far greater and far more insidious. Actually, one scenario involving the shadow fleet remains largely untested and deeply concerning. What will happen if a dragged anchor triggers unexploded ordnance near major shipping lanes or beneath critical cables and pipelines? The possibility of such an incident occurring in the Baltic or North Sea remains largely unknown, and the consequences largely unqualified. I am not an expert on UXO, but even a cursory look at the available data suggests that the only limit to the cascading effects of such an incident is our imagination. Consider the closure of vital shipping lanes, even for a single day, and the erosion of public trust in maritime safety and governance. Western governments' responses to Russia's shadow fleet remained hesitant and largely defensive until the past Christmas Day. Legal ambiguities and fears of escalation posed significant barriers to taking decisive action. On that day, Russia was widely believed to have orchestrated a hybrid attack using the Eagle S, a sanctioned shadow ship flying the Cook Islands flag. The targets were the Estlink 2 power cable, and 4 telecom cables connecting Finland and Estonia. The timing was no coincidence. It wasn't just Christmas Day. It was a calculated strike just weeks before Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were set to end their dependence on the Russian-controlled power grid and fully integrate with Europe. Moscow's intent was clear: punish defiance. Just 1 year earlier, another vessel, the Hong Kong-registered New Polar Bear, ruptured the Baltic Connector gas pipeline with its anchor. The fact that Russia weaponized a rusty tanker to rupture high-value critical cables and pipelines, even outside territorial waters, was unacceptable by Finnish authorities. Shortly after midnight on December 26, the Finnish Coast Guard intercepted the Inkle S, preventing further damage to the second power cable connecting the 2 states, the Estlink 1, and who knows, the Baltic Connector once again. Finland did nothing more than what international law permits and demands, demonstrating that decisive action can be both lawful and effective. Every state has both the right and the responsibility to defend critical infrastructure, not only within its territorial waters, but also beyond. This includes responding decisively to internationally wrongful acts, even when those acts occur in legal gray zones that Russia has turned into a battlefield. On the international front, the protection of critical undersea infrastructure is increasingly being reinforced. The UK-led Joint Expedition Force stands out as a promising Western initiative, ready to confront hybrid operations against critical undersea infrastructure. NATO, for its part, possesses both the capability and the capacity to counter maritime hybrid threats. At the summit of Baltic Sea allies, held in Helsinki in January, NATO launched the Operation Baltic Sentry, a multi-domain vigilance mission aimed at deterring sabotage and protecting critical undersea infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. The European Union is also stepping up. It recently passed a new mandatory ship reporting directive requiring all vessels, including those merely passing EU waters, to provide proof of lawful insurance. This closes a key loophole exploited by shadow fleet operators. Stopping Russia's shadow fleet will not be easy. Russia doesn't need to escalate. It only needs to keep the West uncertain and hesitant. Adding to this uncertainty is the persistent threat posed by sea-dumped unexploded ordnance scattered across the Baltic Sea, Skagerrak Strait, and the North Sea. These unexploded bombs could be weaponized during hybrid operations with unpredictable consequences. What is needed now is not just resilience, but deterrence backed by legal clarity and political resolve. And by saying these words, I concluded my presentation, and thank you for your attention.